Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Today we have another episode from our series of Fallujah bonus content. These episodes are part of our 20th anniversary of Fallujah II Operation Phantom Fury programming. These bonus episodes are the full length interviews we have been collecting for our 20th anniversary documentary of Fallujah II, which is out now on our YouTube channel, so please go check that out. All these interviews were so good, we didn't want them to just sit in our archive, so we decided to launch them as individual episodes of our show. This episode is with Colonel Michael Shupp. Colonel Shupp was the commanding officer of Regimental Combat Team 1 during the battle. Here is the fourth episode of our bonus content for our 20th anniversary of Fallujah II series. Enjoy! Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vic, and as part of our bonus content, Core Voices Season 2 content, talking through some of the personal accounts of the two battles of Fallujah, I am extremely honored to be welcoming Colonel Shupp to the show. Sir, thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's great to be here with you. Great to tell the story of Fallujah.
Yeah. And so, sir, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us your rank when you retired, and then also your rank and billet at the time of Fallujah II when you were there.
Yeah. So I retired as a Marine Colonel, retired in 2008, spent 27 years in the Marine Corps. It was the greatest experience of my life. Do it over in a heartbeat. Nothing better than being with our Marines and doing all the things that we did inside the Marine Corps. During Fallujah, I was a colonel and I commanded Regimental Combat Team 1, Incheon. That was our call sign, Incheon. And we had the AO, the area of responsibility, called Raleigh, and that was in the El Anbar province, the Sunni Triangle.
Awesome, sir. And then your experience then, when did you, so 27 years, when did you enter the Marine Corps?
It was a crazy ride for me. Started as a cadet at the Virginia Military Institute in 1979. Got commissioned in May of 1981. And my mom said, you never get rid of your honorable discharge from when you were a cadet. Your honorable discharge is a private. So I was a private for 2 years, when I was a cadet. And then when you get commissioned, you accept your commission. It was the day after graduation we headed to Quantico. They didn't even give us any leave. We had to get in the cars, leave VMI, drive right to Quantico and take on our responsibilities. And then the Marine Corps was a great experience. I started as a tracker, got into light armor reconnaissance vehicles, and then was lucky enough to get an infantry command later on because of some of my experiences throughout my career. My combat experiences were in the first Gulf War. I was a company commander with 1st Light Armored Infantry Battalion back then. We were Task Force Shepherd, and I was real proud of our company. We were one of the lead LAV companies that led the assault into Kuwait and got at the 1st Marine Division. We got deep into Kuwait City, actually had to turn back and come back and capture the international airport that night, in the middle of the night. So that was a great starting experience. I tell you that about that experience as an LAV commander because it made me work off of map sheets. It made me work over extended periods. It was having a task force, a light armor reconnaissance vehicle that were going to take on enemy battalions, mechanized infantry battalions or armored battalions, and destroy them as we kept moving forward. After Kuwait, and coming back to the States, I was the OPSO for, we became LAR Battalion, Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, and we deployed the battalion into the riots of Los Angeles. Never thought we would go there. My wife and I were watching television on the floor in our house and saying, she goes to me, "Are you going to have to go?" I go, "There's no way. This is America. This is never going to happen." Next thing you know, we were on a hump that weekend on a Saturday, and we had those old brick phones. All
Yeah.
of a sudden, we got a message. We were the Air Contingency Force, deployed the entire light armor reconnaissance battalion into Los Angeles, did the riots in Los Angeles, and that taught me a little bit about mount fighting and how to fight in a city and what the concerns were in a big built-up urban area. That would play out later for me when I got into Iraq. I became a war planner, went to the School of Advanced Warfighting, and then I was a war planner for 26 Mu when we went into Bosnia. And we did show of force operations all through the country in a multinational force.
Were you there
Then,
with Terry Possenbaugh, sir, for that?
say again?
Terry Possenbaugh, he was the Mu platoon, AAV platoon commander during
No,
that.
I don't remember him.
Okay.
We had an aviator. His nickname was Emo. I'm having a gray hair moment. Can't remember his name. He was a pretty colorful Mu commander for 26 Mu. He later went on and became a general and said, he's a great guy. And he really empowered me to go out there and give these orders to all these different contingencies, the Poles, the Brits, the Malaysians, so I was really fine-tuning my skills of writing orders and being able to control large forces of both U.S. forces, but international forces that we were out there with too. It's kind of unique seeing the different characteristics. The Germans were very rigid. The French and the Italians were more concerned with drinking wine and grooming themselves, their hair, than getting into the battle. The Brits and the Malaysians, very professional, and the Poles, very strict and disciplined when they did their operations. I later became a war planner for the entire Marine Corps, believe it or not, over there for Kosovo. I went over to Stuttgart and was the war planner over there at the combined war planning cell. And then they moved us up to Mons, Belgium, to do it for the international force for SHAPE. And then did that operation. Then my next combat assignment, or involved combatant operations, was to go to Iraq as the regimental commander. I went first, as that replacement coming into theater, but then my objective was to assume the command of my regiment that I was selected for. That was 1st Marines. But that was an ordeal and a story that we got to go into too, because I think that's important for Marines to know about.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I guess rewinding a little bit and just listening to you recount your career, there's so many different milestones that have obviously just not only international implications, but sort of American history. And especially when you throw September 11th sort of right in the middle of all of that stuff. What are some of your perspectives, being that you were a Cold War warrior that then had to shift over into this sort of nebulous international policy where we no longer had this monolithic enemy anymore, but we're in the Persian Gulf, and that's a different thing. And then you're shifting over to more sort of humanitarian assistance, stability and stabilization operations. Like, what was all of that? And then with those experiences, what were some of your thoughts and reflections on 9/11 then?
Yeah, but the first thing I would tell you is that, back in the day, we trained for one thing: full-on combat. If you could do
defeat the Soviets.
If you could do full-on combat, you could do everything else. It was going out to 29 Palms for Caxes. It was using large forces on exercise. When I was, platoon commander, was over in Okinawa, going on Team Spirit. When I was a company commander, it was the Gulf War. When I was a battalion commander, I commanded 3rd LAR, the Wolfpack. Then it was going the Bright Star, and being the aggressor force for the Allied contingency forces, working alongside them and then trying to kick their butts out there on the battlefield too. So we had a good training experience. All those things sort of built up for that crescendo, of when I hit Fallujah. And you think about it, because I had some other kind of odd tours in there. Big thing for an armor officer is to go to Fort Knox. So I went to Advanced Armor and worked with the Army. But then I also went to TACOM to work the acquisition for the next generation LAVs. And by chance, we were selling the LAVs to the Saudi Arabians. So every 3 months, I got to sit down at a table and negotiate with senior, Saudi Arabian military about the future LAV. So I understand how to negotiate with them, what you do and you don't do. And that was always building my career, but the Marine Corps was building me up to have a full range of responsibilities and duties that you have to go after. So going into Fallujah became very easy. I told you about that MOUT experience inside of Los Angeles and stuff. And I was a city kid from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Steel City. So, running the streets was not something that I didn't understand. I knew where things were and stuff and how to get around a city pretty easy. But I think they all built up, and that helped me with addressing all those different aspects of the battle that we would face inside of Fallujah, because I never expected that we would have to do so many of those things at one time. You mentioned about 9/11. Where was I? And I think 9/11 shaped our generation. Because that's why we were over there. And I'll talk more about why we fought over there and what I told Marines why they fought before the battle, before we went into Fallujah. So I just was selected to be the Marine liaison for the House of Representatives. Don't have any idea how I got that. I had a couple of master's degrees. The commandant said, "You're not going to goof off up at Newport. You're going to go learn how Capitol Hill runs. It's going to be good for our Marine Corps." So changed my orders, went to Capitol Hill and found myself up there in the Rayburn building with the House of Representatives. And I get a call from my wife, and my wife is a flight attendant for U.S. Airways.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and she's up in Newark area, and she goes, "I don't want you to be scared or anything. We had a plane that just flew into the World Trade Center. We think it might have been a navigational error or something." They were just getting preliminary information. Right. They didn't even know what was happening. And we had a TV mounted inside the Marine liaison office, and I'm watching, and I see the second tower get hit. And I told her, "Hey, this isn't a navigational error, something going on. Be careful where you're at right now." The next thing we were on Capitol Hill, also, we had to evacuate the buildings. This is when the threats were coming against DC, to hit the Capitol or to hit the Pentagon. So it was the craziest thing, because here's all the, our offices, Marines, sailors, soldiers, airmen, we're out there on the streets, but we're out there with all these senators and congressmen, and everybody had those old Motorola phones.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to talk, and they're all crashing.
Yep.
But they wanted you out of the buildings. They wanted you on the street. And then as the day would wear on, we started getting reports of what was happening. And then it was to hurry up, get back to your homes, and then start continuing operations from at home for a period before we got together again and started up the operations again. So that's kind of the 9/11 piece for me, is being in Washington, D.C. at the time, and just seeing the Capitol complex and seeing the Pentagon struck. We lived in Maryland, so we went north. You couldn't get south. You couldn't get across the bridges back then when 9/11 happened. You could see the fire in the distance, but you really were uncertain what was going on in the Pentagon.
That's so fascinating, sir, because it's interesting how the accounts, of most. So, we joke, I guess it's one of our idioms in the Marine Corps that, we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do the entire day. And because of that, there are so many Marines that didn't realize what was happening until the second. My own personal experience is, and the listeners of the show are probably rolling their eyes because they've heard this story 1,000 times. But, when the first plane hit, in a very similar fashion, a Marine came into the office. We had just finished PT. I was getting ready to head down for morning formation. And one of the Marines came in and said someone flew a plane into the World Trade Center. And the same thing was like, what kind of idiot flies into a building like the World Trade Center? We had no idea, no even thought of being attacked. And then once everyone realized what's going on, hey, get up to the common areas. We're going to get together and find out what's happening. And then we all see the second tower get hit.
It really was inconceivable. Nobody really thought about it. But to me, and I think this might be why you asked that question, as a commander before the battlefield, you're going to be asking your troops to make the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
So I felt compelled that I had to go out and visit all my formations inside of RCT-1, inside of Incheon, and go out there and talk to them. So I gave them a a little pep talk, a little speech, and said, "Hey, we're over here fighting for the following things. You know, don't forget 9/11, this war on terror. We're fighting on their ground because we're not going to fight back on our ground, and we're not going to lose our families for this battle. We're going to stop terrorism over here. You know, second thing is you're fighting for, core flag and country, some of those things that we all knew about, beat into us at the drill
Right.
field and all our careers and stuff about that." Then I told them, and this is something I think resonated with a lot of us, is we were trying to protect the innocent people in Iraq that were they were just pawns. They were just getting slaughtered by these terrorist forces that were over there. When I say terrorist forces, there was all kinds of people over there that we were fighting. Criminal elements, jihadists, extremists, people from all through the region that wanted to kill someone from the West. That's who we're fighting. And then the fourth one is that you look to your left and look to your right. You're fighting for your fellow Marine, your soldier, sailor, airman, all of the U.S. forces that are fighting together. And I go, that's really what this is coming down to. I mean, the other things we know about, they're in our mind. But when you ask yourself why you're fighting later on, you're only going to think of one thing: is my buddy to my left and to my right of me. And I wanted that to resonate with them because I wanted them to all be taking care of each other. I didn't want them to feel like they were alone on the battlefield, and I wanted them to realize that they had a responsibility to each other, and that was going to help us win this battle.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's such an interesting perspective. I think it resonates. I think we've all sort of said it in one form or fashion, because especially, well, for me, I was there for the initial push, and there was definitely the sense of, regardless of, cynicism is sort of my love language. But even then, there was always the prospect of, when it started coming out that they were harboring weapons of mass destruction, all of the questions of why were we in Iraq? I mean, all those things were going through my head. But as we're sitting there in the assembly area, or especially in the attack position, it was like, okay, well, all of that shit, that no longer matters. It's about the Marines in my vehicle. It's about the Marines to the left and right of me. And it's about all of us coming home. So, fuck it. Like, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do it well. And we're going to be amazingly, like, mind-boggling aggressive and violent so that we all come home at the end of the day, because I don't want to be compiling letters saying, well, I sort of half-stepped it and that's why your son's not coming home. Yeah. Like, regardless of my personal feelings about what was actually going on. So yeah, I think a lot of that really does resonate.
Vic, the other thing that hit is the regiment, after the regimental CP was hit, and Larry Nicholson, Colonel Nicholson at the time was hit, Kevin Shea, great American. Yeah. He lost his life, with that rocket that hit right into the CP. There was no doubt in anybody's mind what this fight was about.
Yeah.
It was us versus them. And this was a full-on conflict. There was no half-stepping when this fight. It wasn't going down to humanitarian assistance. It was, we were going to full-on battle.
Yeah.
And we were going to do it right. Failure wasn't an option. We were going to win, and we were going to kick some people's butt. I mean, we were going to come out on top of this thing, and we were going to keep as many of our people safe and alive as we possibly can. That was there was no doubt about what we were going to do when we went into this fight.
That's amazing. So yeah, that's talking to Jeremiah Workman, he recounts that because that was literally the day that they got to Camp Fallujah, that rocket attack happened. Yeah. It's interesting to see all of these events happening from different lenses. So I guess along those lines, and so what was it like then? I guess, when did you arrive in Fallujah?
Yeah, this was the craziest thing. So
okay,
I'm leaving Capitol Hill. There was some talk that about me taking command of 1st Marines, when the slate was coming out. Mm-hmm. And I was fighting to get 1st Marines because I thought it was the greatest regiment in the world, Chesty Pull's regiment. This is if you got to take a regiment, that's the regiment you want to take. Finally got the word that I was going, and went over there in May timeframe. Had a report to the division. The division was already deployed. So they actually told me, hey, take 2 weeks leave before you come over here because we don't know when you're coming back. You're going to be over here for 12 to 18 months possibly. And I was like, okay. So en route, as we were going out to Camp Pendleton, my wife and I took a little bit of time, took some vacation. I checked into Camp Pendleton, and it was just a few days later. I was on a plane heading over into theater, and I got in the Blue Diamond, Ramadi area, and Division CP, and I was put in there as a staff officer, the J8, to just sort of get my feet on the ground and get a perspective of what's going on, travel around with General Mattis's security detail and see the battlefield that's going on. It was eye-opening because at that time, because of the situation, they were in static positions along Mobile and the ISRs. The city was in complete control of the enemy. They had traffic control point 1 on the east side of the city where you couldn't get in, and the bridges on the west where you couldn't get into the city of Fallujah. We would have meetings outside of the city of Fallujah. So I got to see that from that perspective, but we were on the defensive and we were being reactive. And I could see we were taking casualties on a regular basis. I'm there for not even a month. And before we left, my wife wasn't feeling good. She'd had some problems. And she was going in for some medical examinations. And she was going through evaluations. And they called me up almost immediately and said, hey, there's a Red Cross message that's coming. Your wife's death imminent. She has cancer. She's going to face multiple surgeries. You need to get back here as soon as you can. So I was in that limbo because I wasn't supposed to take over the regiment until September. And General Dunford and General Mattis, General Kelly was the assistant division commander. They all made the decision and said, hey, Mike, your regiment's going to be here. You got time. Go ahead and get your hands around this. So flew back to the United States right away. Next day after I got done, we went to the tumor board up at Bethesda, and they had an incredible team. Some of the people that I trained back at the Naval Academy when I was a company officer, the lead chemotherapist, radiation chemotherapist, he was Sherry's doctor, and just great people that took care of her. So she went through this intense period of radiation chemotherapy, and it was either they were going to have to start cutting or she was going to be on the success level. And it was towards the day 50, it was really bad, terrible radiation burns, and I get a call from General Mattis. General Mattis goes, we hear things aren't going too well. But what we're going to do is we're going to give Larry Nicholson 1st Marines, and you're going to take 5th Marines. That'll give you another 6 months to try to take care of your wife to get through this. As luck would have it, the radiation burns healed. And then afterwards, we had to go for a whole series of tests. And the doctors came out and said, we beat it. We burned the tumor away. The tumor's not there. We can't see it. All we see is scar tissue right now. So she was on heavy medication, but I ran out all my humanitarian assistance leave and everything. I had no more leave left. Everything was just diminished, and it was get your butt back over. So I got back in theater about 9th of September, and I had to fly through Baltimore to go out to get back to the unit. And
got back in the Kuwait International.
No, I'm trying to think where exactly. I think we flew into. Man, this is a mess right now. I think we did fly into Kuwait, and then it went by a C-130 into Baghdad, then a helicopter from Baghdad into.
Yeah, you took military to Taji, and that probably right. Yeah.
So God. It ended up inside of Blue Diamond again, and they said, "Okay, we're going to figure out where you're going." It's the 9th of September. And now my buddy from the drill field, Larry Nicholson, we were series officers together down there. He's going to take over 1st Marines. So I resigned myself to my fate that I was going to be a staff officer for about 6 months. And then when 5th Marines came over, I would join my regiment in combat. That's the way it would work. Went to Larry's change of command that day. Just kind of sat in the audience thinking to myself, man, this could have been me, but had to do it. It was the right thing to do, and she's alive, and now it's time to get down to business again. And came back to Blue Diamond. The night went on. All of a sudden, in the evening, I get a knock on my hatch and it says, "Get up! You're going to be going to Fallujah." And I had no idea what happened, and go to see General Natonsky in the morning and said, "Mike, you're going to take command of your regiment." So about 7 o'clock in the morning, escort brought me into Fallujah and go into the CP, and it's still burning, still smoking in my office. And the CBs are taking down walls and putting, plywood up, and it smells like a humidor. It's, from smoke from the explosions inside there. It's heavy smell. And now I'm getting used to everybody on the staff, but this was at the transition point too.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody coming in is brand new. Kyle Gentry's taking over for our now commandant, Eric Smith. Eric Smith was coming back as the XO. Chet Chisani was taking over for Sparky Renforth. He was the 3. I was taking over for Larry now, and Dave Bellin was the only continuity. He was the intel officer that was still there, so we were getting people from all over the Marine Corps coming in, different units. 3-1 was coming, 3-1 was there, 3-5 was coming, and we were putting people together to get ready. But we were in the middle of this a fight. It was not unusual for Camp Fallujah, which is basically about 45 minutes outside of the city, to get artillery or rocket attacks coming into us. And Dave Bellin gives me a brief and he goes, "Sir, if we attack the enemy every 24 to 48 hours, we will seize the initiative and we will knock them off their cycle and they will not be able to attack us." And it was perhaps one of the best suggestions I could possibly get. And we just started taking the fight to the enemy. When I was going on my initial tours of the battlefield to go see everybody, I went into one position on the northwest corner of Fallujah in a little village called Sacklawea.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in an outskirts in a little firm base on the north side of it. And I got there and, it was like, "Hey, sir, don't go walking around and we're going to get mortared." And I was like, "Where are we getting mortared from?" And they go, "Right down there, that little town down there." I go, "Why aren't we going down there to kick the shit out of them? I mean, what are we doing here? Why aren't we taking the fight to them? They should be mortaring us. We should be mortaring them." I run into TCP-1, Traffic Control Point 1 on the east side of the city. It was like a high-speed rush with a Humvee, and you went into this revetment, and then you had to get out and go run out into the positions and visit the tankers or visit the infantrymen that were out there. But it was like trench warfare. I mean, the enemy was firing at us, we're firing at them, and you were not safe at that TCP. Went up to Karma. On the way up, it was like IED City on the way up there, back and forth. Why do we got all these IDs out here? How's this happening? Well, we can't cover everything, but are we covering anything? We were at these static positions that I see was continuous. So I said, "Okay, that's it. We're done with this. We're going to take the fight to the enemy." And General Natonsky really let me run with it. He was 1st Marine Division commander. He was the greatest. He just, "Mike, here's your mission. Go do it. Destroy the enemy. Take the fight to the enemy. Protect your Marines, and let's contain the enemy where they're at inside of Fallujah." So that started the change, I think, on the 15th of how things would be done. On my birthday, 24 September, was the first attack that we had on the city, and we attacked the north end of the city. And I really didn't have a perspective of how heavy the concentration of strength was in the city. And it was a night attack. It was just a probe. It wasn't to go into the city or anything. And I believe that was 3-5 who did that attack on the north side of the city. But when we attacked that city and started firing some of our rockets and long-range weapons into the city, it looked like the Super Bowl. You know how you see all the flashlights from people in the stands or the Olympics? The whole
Mhm.
city lit up as I was looking through my IRs and saying that, man, there's a gunfire coming back at us. They're all over the damn place. It's not like small pockets of resistance. It's the whole front of the city was firing back at us. And so, and I think we were good, safe on range. We were taking any casualties or anything, but it really brought things into perspective to me that stronghold out there is going to take a little bit of force to go and knock it down to parade rest. Then 3-1 did an attack on the west side of the city, and they went out the soda factory. And it was, again, another show of force. But it was a show of force that we were seeing what the enemy had. So Willie Buell went and took this attack. Major Arnold and the security detachment, all those crazy Marines from Amarillo, Texas, the reservists were tow critters, 4th tanks were my security detachment, took me into this major intersection looking out over the soda factory. And I go, sitting there, I go, man, I can't see. We need to get this better position to go see. You can't see what's going on. So Bill Arnold took me up, moved me to a new position. We weren't out of there like a minute. We got a full-on attack of rockets come into that position. And we were all looking at each other like saying, man, they're out there and they're looking at us. They can see us. They know what we're doing. They're trying to hit us. And they have indirect fire that can come to bear. They weren't as accurate as we would want, but they were still firing at us. And hey, that was going to take people out if they can. But these attacks were starting to knock them off kilter. And it was all coming from the east. And as the battle would develop, as plans were developed, that's where I want them to think the battle was coming from, either from the east or from the west. I didn't want them to think they was coming for where RCT would be the main effort of the ground attack, coming from that northwest corner, coming into Fallujah, going into the Jalan, that area around there. So that kind of set the stage for me taking over the regiment, getting this wide group of Marines from all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, putting them all together, forming a cohesive team, and then starting to take the fight to the enemy. And I'll tell you, once the Marines were getting out of static positions and starting to take the fight to the enemy, IED attacks went down, indirect fire attacks went down, and now we were keeping the enemy at bay while we could start thinking about the next step, which I believe was going to be reducing Fallujah. So it was pretty nice for us.
So as you're doing these sort of show of force shaping operations, had there already been discussions about a major operation, or were you just doing this as you were developing your IPB?
I think it was initially developing the IPB, but as you got into October, you knew what was coming.
Yeah, okay.
We were already drawing the battle plans, going to the School of Advanced Warfighting, the regiment was developing, getting a really good setup of being able to do current plans, doing future, 48 hours and beyond, and then doing plans, change of mission. So we had the planning team working like a machine, and Kyle Gentry was running the staff pretty well. Chet Chasani was doing a great job as the 3, getting his different cells set up to do their plans and then do the handoffs so that things keep moving in the right direction. At the same time, we were taking on current operations. But the shaping operation that went on was quite extensive. People used to come in and say, hey, out of the regiment, what unit or individual has killed the most of the enemy in this area? And we had this one little UAV operator, because we had Scan Eagles, and his name was Greenfield. And Greenfield was an intel analyst, probably the most unassuming person you would ever see. He's not the person you want to take into a knife fight, but Greenfield was kicking ass and taking names. And he knew that city like the back of his hand. He knew when the enemy was moving in cars and massing and there were meetings in the city. He knew where their logistics were. He knew where their command posts were. He was giving us their built-in heavy weapon positions. He was telling us their enemy strengths and weaknesses in the battlefield. And it was coming off of these UAVs, these Scan Eagles that we were using, our probes that we were using against the enemy. We would hit them and then see the reaction. And now we're starting to do more of the shaping of what's going to happen into the battle. Going into the southern area of the city and seeing if we could lease land and water and supplies, because we were going to stage areas there. We never used that as staging area. Making those probes on the east side of the city, the northeast side of the city, but then seeing what the enemy position was in other areas, the Fallujah Peninsula across the Euphrates, the northern portion of the city, doing little probes and things like that. We started to really get intense, in the weeks prior, and that's where other forces started to come into us as well. The Army forces came first, 2nd and 7th Cavalry, great unit, led by Jim Rainey and Tim Karcher. Never thought that going advanced armor and Cav leaders course was going to pay as much dividend as learning how to speak Army when those guys came over, because we were able to integrate them pretty quick. I'll tell you more about 2-7 and stuff, and how heroically they fought on the battlefield. Incredible unit. No one's going to talk bad about the Army to me. Want to talk about it. And we had everybody with us, from the SEALs to the Air Force, all the dog handlers. We were the priority of all air. Everything was being forced to us. But we were doing things like running fixed wing, high speed over a city to bust out windows. Going supersonic, breaking the sound barrier. We were dropping leaflets and radios on the city, telling them, get out of the city. Things there's going to be an attack coming into the city. We were illuminating the entire city at night. So they knew we were coming. But the other thing we did is we set checkpoints all around that city. If you were a military age male, you were scrubbed. They were doing gunpowder residue. They were doing retina tests. They were searching those vehicles with dogs and everything. And if that happened, you were coming to the regimental holding pen for 24 to 48 hours, and then you were going to Abu Ghraib, if we found that there was something fishy with you. So they knew they couldn't get out of the city. And I think the enemy said, let them come. They thought it was going to be the same thing as the first Battle of Fallujah. And that's important to know, having that perspective, because we learned from the first Battle of Fallujah. Jason Baum, who commanded 2-1, put together an incredible, detailed account of that battle, and he passed that on to us. So we knew where vital areas were to seize as we got ready to attack. We weren't taking for granted what happened with the first battle and the sacrifices that they made. And we were going to learn from those lessons learned and make sure that we capitalized on that. And our Marines weren't facing some of those same threats. We'll talk more about that. Then came the integration of Iraqi forces. And it's worthwhile talking about the existing Iraqi forces. Initially, when we got out there, they had the reserve units of the Iraqi forces. And those reserve forces were completely compromised. They were locals that joined the reserves, and the enemy knew their families. They knew where they lived, and they basically threatened the hell out of them. And it was not unusual for them to kill people to get their way. In the northern portion of the city, there was this roadway where they would take people and just execute them, throw them into a ditch on the north side of the city. So, and we could see it with unmanned systems that they were doing these type of things. So we knew that that wasn't going to be of help and that they were going to turn. The MEF had these forces called Shawani Special Forces. And I think they watched too many Rambo movies because they were all wearing sunglasses and they were all overpaid. And when the fight came, those guys deserted like on the first night. So they weren't effective. The reserve forces, prior to the battle, we made up a ploy to say, hey, our armorers need to get all your weapons because we're going to clean them and we're going to put new sights on them. So we collected all the weapons off the battlefield and all the radios. So they had none of the radios or communications on the battlefield. This is how we were shaping it. But the Iraqi forces that they did bring me were 2 Iraqi intervention forces of the regular army that were coming out of Baghdad. And they were a composite force of Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds. And they were a little bit more professional. But I won't forgive the General Petraeus and his gang for sending those Iraqi soldiers to us with street shoes, no ammunition, no medical supplies, no communication, no heavy weapons, and no transportation. No first aid kits either. They just didn't have anything. So we had to set up a camp and start training them in the basics. Can you shoot your weapon? Identification of friend to foe, first aid, how to clear a building, you know. But I knew then that they could not be put into the assault. And I was getting pressure to say that they had to go into the assault. But I knew that it would have been slaughter if I put them in. But there were things that they could do. And I'll give a little bit away from it. What we later incorporated them to do is they would follow behind U.S. forces and search these buildings. And they were experts of it. They could help guard a line of communication from static positions, but they weren't ready for offensive operations or to start, clearing large stretches of land to go through it. They didn't have the discipline, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the endurance, and they didn't have the equipment. I mean, we had to actually march them into the city when they started to do their job, but they did their job in a good fashion, and they were proud of the work that they were doing. But we had to help them. We had to teach them. We had to make them feel as if they were part of the unit. We had to introduce them to the battlefield. I think about it sometimes, and I think we're naive sometimes with our training programs. Most of our young men and women all graduate from high school and have some college. They go through 10 weeks of boot camp. Then they go to their specialty school. Then they get integrated. These poor guys spent 2 weeks in training and said, you're going to fight. And you're not just going into a fight, you're going into a full-on fight. They were not ready. And I think any person that's a professional on the battlefield would have known that. But they could serve a mission for us, and they did very well in what we asked them to do to help out later on in the fight. There was a lot of people that were saying that, hey, you're just going into a frontal attack. And I was like, this isn't a frontal attack. I got a pretty wide stretch of area. I got the whole west of the city, down the Euphrates. I got the north side of the city, half of the city going down into the John. I could play with this. We could make some actions out of this. We could deceive them on the battlefield. And I worked for this Colonel Ray Cole out at 1st LAI when I was an OPSO. And this guy made us go to every CAX. We were the aggressor force. And he hammered into us that you will use surprise and deception on every one of your operations. If you don't, it's a fail. You are going to make the enemy think you're coming a different direction, and you're going to attack and hit them overwhelm them from the other directions. That's going to be your principle. Deceive, surprise, mass, strike hard, strike at distance. Don't get decisively engaged. Shape that battlefield. And so I'm starting to think there to myself, how am I going to do this? And then we started thinking about the preliminary plans. So then we had the Wolfpack, my old battalion, 3rd LAR, and we said, let's drive them up the peninsula, Fallujah Peninsula. They could take the Fallujah Hospital, and there was a National Guard outpost on the north portion of the city, and the bridgeheads for the old Fallujah Bridge and the new Fallujah Bridge. But now they would be able to look across the Euphrates into the city, and with their chain guns, which I knew only too well from the first Gulf War, they were going to be able to rip apart that western side of the city. Steve Dinar was battalion commander. Kastner was there. These guys were great Marines, and they executed flawlessly to come up that peninsula and seize those objectives. General Antonsky says the first images coming out of Fallujah came from Iraqis inside the Fallujah hospital. It's not a hospital like people back here in the United States would think about.
It's like Cedar Sinai or anything.
Yeah, it's like a 10-bed clinic, so it's not a big facility. But they were filming it, and we were pretty surprised about it. So now the enemy was concentrating on that west side of the city, and they were firing across that river at 3rd LAR, trying to engage them. And our engineers were blocking their passage because no one was getting out of that city. That was a lesson learned from that first battle. They used the Euphrates to reinforce and to escape the city. So we were going to seal off that city completely. So the 3rd LAR with their firepowers, and guess who was coming up the Euphrates River? Small Craft Company. Who would have ever thought that we'd have small craft company? And those guys worked incredibly, sealed off that entire city. there was a Syrian beach patrol, we called it. They tried to escape on rubber beach balls, float across the river.
Oh, no kidding.
And the small craft company got them, so it was pretty much in our hands and control. But now the enemy was looking to the west, and we had the northern portion of the city to come into. So I told you 2-1 in the first battle of Fallujah. They told us about, you got to seize these apartment houses on the outskirts of the city. Scuttlebutt, the town coming down, and these apartment buildings. So 3-5 did an infiltration in the night, and they did an excellent job. Pat Millay and the Dark Horse came right in there. They seized it at night. We were able to occupy early in the morning and get ready for the battle there. But that battlefield was, there was a single road, ASR Gold, going into that northwest corner of the city. And then you had the palm groves on the west that were an obstacle for our forces in the first battle of Fallujah. But the cemetery was right in front of this single road, ASR Gold. And you had to go through an underpass where these train tracks were to get into the city. And I'm saying, we are doing a frontal attack into that portion of the city. And I'm going through a tube to come out the other side and going to be facing heavy machine gun fire and RPG fire coming out the other side. So we ain't doing that. We're going to figure this out. So we started coming up with plans, and it required detailed planning to do 2 things. One, to see how we can move off of ASR Gold and use more of the terrain to come into the city. And there was a train track. There's like 3 or 4 tracks width. And it was right next to a train station. And 3-1 was going to come this route into the city. So we had to do a reconnaissance to see if we'd get wheeled vehicles and tracked vehicles over these train tracks. So the Marines say, hey, so we could get you. This was during shaping operations. We could get you. We're going to put you in as a loader in a tank. And I'm, all right, I'm advanced armor. I know how to be in a tank. I went down there. I worked at the Army at Fort Knox. I know how to do this. So we're going down the roadway, going into the city, a tank platoon under Lieutenant Cash. And we're coming down this road, and I look at my map, and Cash is missing his marks. I call him on the intercom. I go, Cash, if you keep going, we're going to start this Battle of Fallujah about two weeks early. Okay, we're going to be in the city, this tank platoon, So he hurry up and takes a right turn, and we come across the city. And as we pass the train stations, we could start coming under mortar fire and heavy machine gun fire. And the tanks, you're pretty safe in the Abrams. There's anything going to happen. And the fire command comes out. Gunner HE, right? Cash is working the 50. And now we're start. So I got to go to hit the knee board, get the round out, shove it inside the tube. And they're all looking back at me. It's like, hey, Colonel, you going to get this in there? And I thought I was pretty fast, but I guess I was a little bit older then, a little bit slower than what the Marines are used to. I give them the up, man, boom, off it goes. But we were able to see that portion of the city, firsthand experience going to see it. Got away nicely. That round destroyed the enemy. The tankers later on brought me a stubby and put it in my office, which was a good little keepsake. That tank company, Marine Tank Company, fired more tank rounds than the entire Marine Corps during the Battle of Fallujah. More tank rounds than the Marine Corps did in the march to Baghdad. Bravo Company, 2nd Tanks, fired more tank rounds, over 2,000 tank rounds into the city. They were an incredible force. Don't anybody tell you that tanks can't go into a city and fight, because they could fight in the city. And we called them the 120 millimeter sniper rifle. And with their vision, they could see just about anything moving on the battlefield. They mixed with our infantry, you couldn't beat them. So we still had this passage that we had to come into the north, but I knew it was clear for me to get into that passage. I said, I got to come from the west somehow. So Pat Millay and his people came up with the idea that, hey, if we drop like 4 2,000-pound bombs on this area, we're going to reduce this berm, this railroad track that's sitting on this berm, and we're going to be able to drive bulldozers through there, the D5s, and we're going to be able to come into the flank of the city. The enemy's not going to know what's happening. We went through maybe 6 iterations to get this passed. Could not get this passed through higher headquarters. And I'm at the chow hall, this is like 2 nights before the battle. And Sergeant Major Kent, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, he was our MEF Sergeant Major. We were co-located with the MEF, RCT-1. He goes, "What's wrong, Colonel?" The 2 of us served on a drill field. He was a junior drill instructor. I was a series officer. And I go, "We're going to lose a lot of Marines in this coming battle because we're going down a single axis. We're going underneath an underpass. And I can't get permission from division or MEF to go and bomb these because they're afraid of the infrastructure." And he goes to me, "Sergeant Major," goes, "Sir, go back to your office. 15 minutes, you're going to receive a call from General Sattler, MEF commander, and you're going to come up and brief him and tell him what you need to do." 15 minutes goes by. Sergeant Major Liardo and myself are sitting in the office. We get the call. We have to go run up there. We go run up there, take my maps and everything, and tell General Sattler. General Sattler looks and says, "You got it. We're going to do it." Now, I know him saying that, and General Natonsky, they had to run that all the way up the chain. And I don't know how far that went up the chain. I think it went to General Casey. But there was no trains on that track. And the whole time we were there, we didn't see a train operating. And who the hell cared about the train tracks? We need to blow those train tracks to get our Marines to come into the flank of the enemy and hit them from the side. Sure enough, it happened. Iraqis thought we were bombing in the distance, couldn't hit the targets. They didn't know what we were doing. And this was setting up the dark horse to go racing into that city. I'll get back to that a little bit more. 2-7 tanks, 2 tank companies, Abrams, 2 Bradley companies. And they came with all the fixings. It was like an Indy 500 trailers that they brought to fix tanks on the north side of the city. And they didn't care if it was a Marine tank or an Army tank. If a tank was damaged, you drove in there, you were leaving with a new tank, you were changing your gear over, they were putting you back in the fight faster than you could possibly imagine. I cannot tell you how incredible that was to have that kind of support into the battlefield. And 2-7 would play significant roles as we continue with the battle. We'll keep talking about that in a second. Iraqi forces, they were coming along. We had a big dinner for them for the staff NCOs and the officers. They were starting to become a part of the force, and they were proud to be there. They were a difficult movement piece because we had to move them by foot up to the north side of the city, stage everything. I mean, as far as you could see at night, you could just see forces up there on the battlefield. I think that gets you staged with the shaping battle before going into the actual city. Any questions you have on what we talked about right there?
No, sir. No, that's unbelievable. Yeah, if you could just, what was it like? I know in some of the other accounts, there's a lot of not perception, but there were some, because they were, folks, like you said, were surging through, coming in at different iterations. Some folks are coming in with weeks before the battle, some a week before the battle.
That was really interesting. I take my hat off to like 7th Marines. 7th Marines was a supporting attack. They were in the east. They came from the river cities. They had no idea what they were getting into.
Yeah.
And they just saw this fortification in front of them. But 7th Marines were good Marines, and they were going to attack and work through their section of the city. And I knew that if I let them go a little bit early, the enemy's going to get drawn over there. So I'm drawing the enemy to the river, and I'm drawing them to the east. I'm opening up my area that I have to go into. And when we go into it, we were going to go in at different directions. So I don't think it was easy to move that many units on the battlefield. Now, think about this too. The Army brought a brigade, and they were taking over our old responsibilities outside of Fallujah. So we were able to focus, the regimental combat team was able to focus on the fight inside of Fallujah, while another Army brigade was taking the surrounding areas of Fallujah and Ramadi that they were taking care of. 3-1 Mu, I think, was down in the south, preventing forces from coming up. So it was a theater operation. It was not just one area of the battlefield. It was forces were moving from every direction, and it was being done very efficiently, very quickly, and the enemy just had no idea what we were doing. They did not have the intel that we had outside of that city because it was open desert around the city of Fallujah. Mm-hmm. But city of Fallujah was a pretty big obstacle to take on. I think it was like 200,000 people in the city. There were not that many in there when we went into the city because of all the shaping, but about 300,000 structures, 6 miles by 6 miles. I'm going off of memory, so
Yeah,
please,
yeah.
don't if you fact check me, I think I'm close. 6 miles by 6 miles. Euphrates on the west side, swamps on the south, minefields and open areas in a elevation on the north side, a single access road. And then you have on the east side TCP-1, and then rough terrain that could prevent it. So we could isolate the battle pretty well, and those forces did it. So let's talk about getting into the battle.
Yeah.
Okay. So we got the enemy off to the west. We got them 7th Marines coming from the east, pushing on them, and we're hoping that this area opens up. Bombed out area occurred. Sergeant Major Ken, I will forever be indebted to him and the whole MEF staff, for getting that through for us finally and allowing us to do it. General Stalder flew the planes, the wing commander that made the strikes, which I just think is incredible that we had a flag officer flying planes into battle.
Really?
Drop bombs on this railroad burn. 3-5 went through there faster than you could possibly imagine. I had to slow them up because they were going to get in the way of the Mikliks firing in front of 3-1 as we came forward. After we passed those railroad tracks that we talked about, we had to fire Mikliks through the minefield and then go through with plows on tanks to get to the other side, to get into the city, the northeast corner of the city. So 3-5 was coming now from the west into the city, while 3-1 was coming from the north, and the regimental CP was up on top of these apartment buildings. It was funny about the apartment buildings. We had this big battle about preparatory fires. We're going in the largest battle since Way City, and we can't fire on the city to do preparatory fires. We knew where the enemy positions were from the UAS, but they're limiting us what we're able to strike. And we were hitting command and control points, logistic points, heavy weapon positions. That's what we want to go after. So they said, you can't fire into the city until you're fired upon. So as soon as we got
who is they, sir? Is that
higher headquarters?
Oh yeah.
Higher headquarters. As soon as we took those apartment buildings, we ran up the American and Iraqi flags, and our friends in the city just started firing on us. And it was the greatest thing in the whole wide world, because when they start firing on us, now I was able to take them under fire with artillery. I was able to take them under fire with airstrikes. I was able to take them under with our long-range sniper weapon systems. And we were given all of the special operation forces sniper teams. And we had our own sniper teams. But at the first stage of the battle, they were grouped together. This is before we disseminated them down to the unit level, down to the company level to fight on the battlefield. We could talk more about that. It was like the Department of Defense rifle matches on top of that. And there were the 4 services taking shots downrange, to see what they could hit from special operations. And they were just clearing the battlefield for us, making it safe for our Marines to go through. We sent force recon down before. They found all kinds of IEDs, so we knew where these things were as we approached the city. That's why that going across by the railroad tracks versus that road down the ASR Gold was the way to go and do it and get into the city. Nighttime attack was when everything was. And man, no illumination. It was no ambient light. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. And 3-5's making great success come apart. 3-1 had some problems. They actually had a vehicle repair that had to be done, and there was a Marine that got crushed underneath a vehicle as it came off the jacks, Humvee, and they were trying to clear that, but their attack was stalled. They couldn't get forward. We were getting a lot of pressure from division to get moving. So Bill Arnold said, I need to move. We got to get down the battlefield, see what's going on there, because you're not getting clear reports. You got to see things on the battlefield. You got to feel it. he gets us right to the position we need to. And I see what's going on. I said, okay, we need to divert our forces, go around this incident and get in this path and come through. And the D9 was working, and the bulldozer was working in front of us. I think if that young guy, if we would have let him, he would have probably gone to China. He was just clearing it and clearing it. And I looked and I said, that's enough. I go, let's get the tank with the plow to go through. So the tanks came through with perfect. We're meeting up now with 2-7. So now we have 2-7 Cav and 3-1 joined forces, and they're starting the attack on the north portion of the city. 3-5 has come across from the west and fighting that enemy element. So we're converging on the enemy from two flanks and going south. And we have clearly divided the battlefield between 7th Marines and 1st Marines. So things are working well. For those Marines, those fights inside that city was nothing but house to house and strong point fighting. You had to reduce the house. And the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they came up with just incredible. Get to the high ground, bring in fires, bring in tanks, isolate the building, breach the building with either a vehicle going through the privacy walls or through the side walls or from the top down, and clearing the enemy out, clearing the enemy forces out. In the north side of the city, I think that the enemy said, hey, we'll bloody the American forces, and then they're not going to continue the attack. They'll slow the attack. That was not going to happen. And when they came out in the streets, 2-7 and 3-1, they just slaughtered them. It was relentless. They didn't lay up the pressure. Now, 2-7, when they came with us, only came with like 80 infantry. So they needed to be working hand in hand with 3-1, or they could not be successful and would have been vulnerable on the battlefield. And those two units, all the units, worked out perfectly with 2-7. Commanded by General Rainey and Karcher was their 3. They did an incredible job coming into the city. But those tankers, our tanks, their tanks, and those infantry forces were able to get this penetration going. Our orders were to bypass squad-size units, get beyond these IED belts, get deep into the city so they didn't have a chance to consolidate, to reorganize, to prepare defenses against us, keep the momentum and keep on pushing. So we were relentless. And Willie Buell took them through that north corner of the city. 3-5 kept pushing. He got into Jalan Park, cleared the park, and then was able to get to the pizza slice. And they did that in quick order from what was expected. We got there faster than anybody could have imagined. But we knew we were living in the enemy territory, and there were enemy forces all behind us. And that comes to the next story, because we had to create screens around our force. As 3-1 would advance, the Iraqi forces, intervention force, was coming behind them and starting to clear the buildings of these small pockets of resistance and finding enemy caches of weapons and command posts and intel. And they were turning everything over. It was great to see. Another one of the portion of the Iraqi intervention forces was supporting 2-7 on the main ISR, Fran, going through the city. And they were able to keep 7th Marines boundary and our boundary protected. So as I advanced, enemy forces were not coming into my flank. We were moving together as a force, and I was creating a security area around the 1st Marine battle space as we went down. We seized our area in quick order, but there were some horrendous fights, small unit fights. Goodness gracious, 3-5, Augsburger, I'll never understand this. This really bothers me. 9 Navy Crosses for the Marine Corps, no Medals of Honor. And I think some of those Marines should have got Medals of Honor. We had 1 Medal of Honor. It went to the Army, a soldier who was deserving in the other sectors. But in my opinion, there were more Medal of Honors that needed to be handed out. And that was a big problem, is some of those Marines weren't recognized. And some of them, like Allsberger, I felt like they were invincible. And they were going to do anything they could to protect the Marines. I mean, that young man, his unit was pinned down. He took the initiative, worked from the high ground, came across the buildings, throwing grenades on the enemy, and just swept down and destroyed a whole enemy unit that was attacking it. It had his people, his unit pinned down. One Marine took that initiative. But that one Marine was not an exception. That was common on that battlefield. It was individual Marines fighting from building to building. We had a problem, though. We had to keep this attack going because we didn't want the enemy to organize in the south. And 7th Marines was getting held up on the left flank, looking south on the east. So General Natonski said, could you and 2-7 continue? And 2-7 was going to get chopped to help the supporting attack continue, but it would have been difficult to do a change in the midst of the battle. So 2-7 stayed with us. And this was a really difficult decision because I knew at some point 7th Marines was going to leave and 3-5 was going to have to come through, clear, and go over into that area and clear that space, battle space. And we had to do a passage of lines at night. And 3-1 took a lot of casualties. But I knew doing a passage of lines at night inside of a city while in contact would be impossible. It would not be done efficiently. So we had to make a very difficult call to continue the fight, and Willie Buell picked it up and did perfectly. Willie Buell and 2-7 continued that attack south into the city and cleared that remaining section of the city all the way to the end. And I think that was a point where people were saying that the battle was reaching a culminating point and almost over. It wasn't over because we still had to go through and clear out these pockets of enemy resistance.
It went on for another 4 weeks.
It did. And some of the heaviest fighting, and 3-5 was going to have to pay their price for some of that heaviest fighting. So we started moving through the area, clearing. And Todd DeGrossier, Major DeGrossier, in 3-5, the XO, he formed Task Force Bruno. All the cats and dogs that were in the battalion, and they went through and started clearing the buildings and getting people out of the buildings. Now, I'll stop there because I want to talk about some of the supporting arms and how these worked. We had all the focus of air inside of Iraq. We had no friendly fire casualties from CAS. We had some wounded, but no friendly fire fatalities. And they did thousands of air missions into that city. And the precision of the strikes inside that city were absolutely incredible. Every building was numbered. So you would go, if there was heavy resistance, you couldn't work through it, you would say, drop building 23. And they would tell you time on target, 2 minutes. And it wasn't like peacetime out at the CACs where you had 400 yards. It was across a 4-lane highway. The building on the other side was going to get a 500-pounder in the top floor and drop it. Worked like a charm. Indirect fire. 60s and 80s, 81s. Troops in the open, yeah, effective. Troops in the open. But buildings reinforced concrete like they had over there, no good. The Army brought us all their attitude sensing GPS in 113 carriers, 120 millimeter mortars, 35-pound round. That thing you could put a round into a tabletop. And that 35-pounder, when it hit the top of a floor, would pancake a whole floor. Jeez. We went through all the mortar ammunition in theater, and they were bringing more. Hyperbaric weapons. We went through all the hyperbaric weapons. Tank ammunition. We never were short anything.
You had AC-130s too, right, sir?
Yeah. The C-130s, the gunships at night. I went to sleep many nights hearing the woof, 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 woof. of that 105, just tearing them up. And they had enough vision capability that they could see them coming at our position, and they would tell us, Incheon, they're 200 yards away. Incheon, they were closing down to 150. We were engaging with Gatling guns. And you'd hear those Gatling guns start ripping away, and it was a bad day to be a bad guy in Fallujah. Those guys just ripped them to pieces. And they saved a lot of Marines, and they would come up every night over us in the city. Air was absolutely incredible. No rotary wing, Marine Corps rotary wing. They lost two. They got one on the peninsula. That one got shot down by RPGs. He went forward to his position, lost control of the battle space. And then we lost another one on a medevac run going into Baghdad, escorting people into Baghdad's hospitals. But the Army helicopters, they worked that outside of the city like no tomorrow. They were really good. So the Army brought some really critical capabilities to us to start working. Meanwhile, we still have all these Iraqi forces that are helping us. We're getting to the point where, on the battlefield, the generals are saying, hey, we got to get 7th Marines back out east. So 7th Marines detaches and goes east. Now 3-5 is coming across the main MSR and starts working their way east across the city to complete the northern portion of the city. They ran into some of the heaviest fighting you could possibly imagine because the enemy was dug in and strongholding everything in the second phase of the battle.
That's when we got the Hell House, right, sir?
Yes, it is. That's when Willie Buell's guys hit the Hell House, on the south side of the city. They were in these buildings like bunkers. And remember, every one of these houses had that 5-foot, 6-foot security fence around it. And they had rat holes between the buildings. Willie had the Hell House. Pat Millay had Janabi Hospital up in the north east side of the city. It was a fight that lasted all night long. I think we dropped about 9 buildings. They were moving back and forth between buildings, but we were relentless. We weren't going to let them live in that building. As a building got cleared, you got an X on the building that it was cleared, and you kept working your way across the battlefield.
Yeah, that's Jeremiah Workman talked about that and said, after once you guys decided to go ahead and just level the block, that while he was in there, he was saying, where are all these guys coming from? Like you said, they'd been there for like 3 or 4 hours. Like, where are these guys coming from?
Yeah, it was crazy. And they were taking a toll. We were taking some heavy casualties, and there was no way around it. We were using long-range weapons. The Marines were reducing the buildings, but we saw buildings drop and people coming out of the rubble fighting that had to be taken out. So they knew there was only one way out, and that was for them to fight to the death. We had some of them with tourniquets already put on their arms. In case they got shot, they would just cinch them down. There were indications that they were using drugs in the north section of the city. I remember one location, 3-5 was fighting. They hit this one guy with small arms fire. The guy was wrapped inside of a rug coming down the steps. They had to take a saw to him to put him down. I mean, it was close combat, close quarters. It was maintaining your battle space, but there was nothing fancy about it. It was house to house, building to building. We got to clear every one of them out. We got to get every cache. We got to secure the city. Later on, I think they would find that there was over 500 caches of ammunition inside the city. I mean, they were hoarding and collecting everything. And a cache is not like 4 or 5 rifles. Right. We're talking 200 artillery rounds or 100 mortar rounds. Some of it was so unstable and so big that you had to destroy it in place versus trying to pick it up and move it. And it also gave us an indication where the bad guys were. The civilian population, they were moving. They were hunkered down, and they were gone. It's not like a Gaza. That shaping operation we did ahead of time, left the people that wanted to fight to the death, the people that were really disrupting things inside of Iraq. And I think that was something that played to our advantage. Every prisoner that we caught went to the regimental holding pen for 24 to 48 hours, and then they went on to Abu Ghraib. That was very helpful for us. So that was a big logistic piece as well. But I think we fought about 4,000 in the city. I think 2,000 were killed, and I think 2,000 were captured in the city for the enemy. And we'll never know how many were killed inside that city because they were buried in the rubble. And we didn't have the equipment to go move in those pieces of equipment through the city. But the city was, it was pretty much destroyed as we were fighting through it. The battle intensified as 351 across. And we were getting units that were joining us that didn't have a lot of experience, and they were struggling. We had one unit that was coming into the southwest portion of the city, and they were supposed to kick off their attacks that morning. And I said, we're going to go follow in after them. Well, I wasn't following. I was ahead. We were ahead of them. The regimental combat team was like a quarter mile to half mile ahead of them. We thought they would be advanced. They weren't. So we ended up clearing buildings and fighting back to our friendly positions and getting them moving. But they didn't know how to reduce buildings. The first Marines, 3-1 and 3-5, that were working together knew how to do this better than anybody on the battlefield. And if they weren't doing clearing, we were making sure that they were we were teaching them as best we can. Somehow we had to teach them a personal example. But, you know, they were like, we don't have any ladders. I told my security detachment, go up on the main artery. There's a hardware store up there. Go get every ladder out of that hardware store you can and bring them down here. I go, use your vehicles, pull your tracks up alongside, punch into the building, or climb on the track and climb into the building. So we were having to teach them these type of tactics in battle to clear out that southern portion of the city. But then we worked through that piece. Through the city now. And we got control of it. But I'm not letting this fall back in the enemy hands. We have this entire city surrounded. And we started putting together traffic control points, entry points into the city. And Bill Arnold put these together. And I think the lessons learned are just incredible for what he did, because we had Iraqi forces all the way forward to go and search the vehicles as they started to come back into the city. We had backscatter radars that went through and looked at the vehicles for explosives and weapons. We had blast pits that would bring the vehicles in. We had retinal scans. We had gunpowder residue. We had dogs before they started to come through. And then we had the devices that we could see if there was any weapons on an individual as they were moving. So we were in a really secure position eventually to start bringing the people into the city. And we did. We could put entry control points around the city, and we used the terrain to guard the city. I think we made the largest guarded, residential area in the world with Fallujah.
One hell of an HOA, sir.
Yeah. And we never had a problem again. We never lost another person in the fight. Now, while this is going on, they said, okay, you got to start bringing the people back into the city. So the intervention forces are getting ready to leave us to go back. And it was time for them to go back, because these guys were burning. This is like George Washington's army. They could fight for a week. They rest for a week and take their pay back to the family. They train for a week. They fight for a week, and then they got to switch over again. So it's constant movement. We got convoys going back and forth to Baghdad with these forces. But now I'm getting 2 brigades of the Iraqi army to come in. The regiment's taking over the entire city now. We kept expanding. They kept giving us more and more of the city. So now we control the whole city. But we have 2 army brigades. So we have to start platoon leader, company level officer classes. We have to have them bird dog us on patrols. And these guys don't know how to read maps. They didn't know the basic Marine skills that would be necessary in the battle, but they wanted to learn. Fort Knox came out, and to the Army's great credit, they did an oral history of everybody in the regiment that you could possibly imagine. Listed ranks all the way up to the officer. That's the only way to find out about these battles. Don't just listen to an officer's perspective. It's a unique perspective. You got to go down to the officers, the battalions, the companies, the platoons, and then you got to hit the individual warfighter on the battlefield. There's a lot of people that have done that for Fallujah. Take your time, read through them. Richard Lowry did a really good book on it, but they really captured that essence. But our Marines were incredibly skilled at teaching these Iraqis. And they found that these Iraqis wanted to fight, and they wanted to be quick studies. And we were starting to see a different type of Iraqi force because they were the Iraqi forces from Baghdad. They were more national perspective, and they were fairly decent. But we had to do things like someone has to bring propane in the city because they need propane tanks. We need Iraqis to help at the gates. We need Iraqis to run a bus service for us in the city. We need Iraqis to guard some of the city center for the city. And we had to train them. They weren't prepared to do it themselves. So Jim Donlan had the Public Order Brigade, which were these Iraqi police. We had 2 brigades of Iraqi army that we had, and we had to train them up to make sure that they were ready for any contingency that would happen in the battle. So now we start bringing the people in, and the Iraqi forces told us that there's this food to oil program. Mm-hmm. So they give oil, they give food.
Yeah, remember
and they have little chips. So, we could get the people into the city by district. So we opened up districts at a time and kept gradually filling the city. We filled the city where the commerce sections were so they could open up the stores so they could eat and feed. Then we opened up the adjacent districts and we kept letting people in, but they had to go through the search and screening before they got into the city. So we were running training for the Iraqi forces. We were repairing and restoring with civil affairs type activities, handing out everything from food to blankets to fuels to addressing the water pump stations in Iraq and Fallujah, because Fallujah, like New Orleans, sits below the water table. So when the pumps are out, everything floods in the city. Mm-hmm. Reestablishing clean water. We put water points throughout the city. I go to one water point, the next point, they took the faucets. I had to get the imams together. I said, hey, you can't take the faucets. We need this to distribute water. The faucets came back immediately. Now they started to realize, hey, we're trying to help them. So we're bringing them food, we're bringing them water, we're helping them get the city put back together again, which wasn't an easy task. We had people from multinational forces, UK generals coming out there, and they said, I've never seen anything like this. You're engaged in full-on combat in one sector of the city, you're training Iraqi forces in another sector, and you're bringing civilian people back in another sector and helping them through this. We had to reestablish hospitals, medical clinics more. We had to make sure that there were fuel supplies. The Iraqis were running fuel tanks from Baghdad into the city, but the black market was stealing the fuel along the way. So we had to put Iraqi forces on the fuel tanks because we had like 1970 fuel lines where people were backed up waiting for fuel. And we were having weekly meetings with the Iraqis to hear their issues. This became such a big issue that we were receptive and that we were there to help them, that we were gaining their trust and confidence. And we were gaining it by our action in the city. They knew that we were ruthless warriors, but they could get treated fairly by Americans, and Americans were there to protect them. I never thought more about what's on the side of a police car until I was in Fallujah, and I'd think back to as a kid seeing that, to protect and to serve, because that's what we were there to and for. And we did it to the point of embarrassment that the Iraqi forces were saying, we need to be more like you, and we need to do more of that. And I think one example is this: we had this in the Jalan Park, we had this big humanitarian assistance site, and food trucks were coming in late that day. and the people were banged up, and there were queue lines, concertina, and they were pitting people against the front of the sandbags. And I looked over the sandbags, and there are old women inside this concertina getting ripped up. So I told my security attachment, we got to go over and push them back. So we get over the wall, our interpreter's with us, we're pushing everybody back. And this woman reaches up to me, I grab her hand to bring her out of it, take out my Leatherman, we're cutting her out of the wire. And she goes, God bless your mother and your father. And I started to realize it wasn't me, it was all of our Marines that she was thanking. And it was thanking them because we were going to protect them and keep them safe. We weren't going to let people take advantage of them or pointlessly slaughter them in the city. And the word started getting out, because once we had Fallujah, I wasn't going to rest, because I wasn't going to make this the stronghold that everybody was going to fight. I did two things. One, I wasn't going to live in Camp Fallujah 45 minutes away. I wanted them to see that the American flag and the U.S. forces were staying in Fallujah, and we were going to protect the city, and we were going to control it. So that was the first thing that happened. It was crazy because we established services. They didn't have ambulance services. We established that. They didn't have a fire service. We did that. We established it. We brought back legitimate police forces. Imagine, if you can, how we overestimated this country. They didn't have burglary or homicide sections. They didn't use fingerprints until like
Right.
2004.
I remember trying to set up a detective branch, and they're like, what is that? Like, you have cops, you don't have detectives?
They didn't have potable water.
Yeah.
General Tomsky was saying, you got to repair the city. Like, to what standard? I was asking him. We were, he was laughing about it. He said, do as much as you can. That's why we started bringing in the potable water. We started looking at basic human needs. How do I feed them? How do I shelter them? How do I keep them warm? How do I let them move about? And the next thing we started doing is attacking outside the city. So we went down into the Zayton. We went into Karma. We went up through Saclawea and beyond. And now, as we were going out, the local chieftains were saying, hey, could you come do what you did in Fallujah to our town? Because we need to get rid of these people. I felt as if we were the start of the turn, because now they could see that if you properly use Iraqi forces, if you train them, after we did the heavy work, clearing the enemy, professionally, they could come in and they could fight that next portion of the battle. They could take over it. And that was tough.
Well, Al-Sahwa was right after Fallujah II, right? So, I mean, wasn't it 05 that we had Al-Sahwa, where the Sunni tribal leaders came together and said, these foreign fighters are killing us more than they're killing the Americans. We got to get them out of here.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of that come to realization of what was going on. But, and I knew there was, I would go out into the countryside in around Fallujah and say, hey, does the Iraqi government ever come out here? Do you know? And they look at me like, who?
Yeah.
Iraq, there was no government services like we know in our country. There was no Department of Education or Health and Human Services or, Ministry of Justice to look out for people. They had it, but it was corrupt, and it was people trying to survive. It was a different world. More questions. Your turn. I'm trying to give you as much as I can, but I know I'm missing a lot. But I just wanted to give you a feel for the battle and what our Marines, sailors, soldiers, and airmen did inside that city. They were tremendous. And there was one team. There was no service rivalries or anything like that. Everybody was fighting together because we were in a fight to the death.
No, so this is unbelievable. This is so great. The only question I have for you as we close out, sir, is just as you're reflecting back, and I sent you the questionnaire, so you had a few days to really sort of jog, kick the jukebox sort of thing, Fonzarelli style. What are some of your thoughts on this battle's impact, not just to American history, not just to the Marine Corps mythology, but as we're looking now at really throughout the force, an absence of this kind of resident knowledge, resident experience within the active duty force. What would you have to say to our listeners, maybe who are on active duty or thinking about joining, as far as what some of their takeaways, some of the things that you would want to impart upon them, as we're now looking at, multiple, being again, fighting on multi-theater sort of a world that we're in.
Yeah, man, talk about a big question to go and ask. Well, first of all, I'll say this is we have an incredible military force, and with my own selfish pride, I think that the Marine Corps is the finest fighting force in the whole wide world. I really do. I don't think anything could compare for them on the battlefield. But together with the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, and all the support they bring to the battlefield, you just can't beat the United States fighting forces. And I would make sure that everybody knows this, is that the young men and women that put on the uniform today are just as prepared as Marines have been through generations to go into a fight and win. I think that they are. I think our Marines need to fight not just for one contingency operation, but across the full range of combat, from full-on battle to civil affairs and humanitarian assistance. We got to have people that think on their feet and they solve solutions, that they figure out how to get the job done, even when everything's against them, and they got a determination that they will not fail or let anyone down. I think those things. I think a Marine Corps steeped in tradition. We talked about the birthday. I remember celebrating the birthday for first Marines inside of a stairwell inside of Fallujah in those abandoned apartment buildings, where we read the commandant's message, we read General Lejeun's message. We cut the cake, had the cake, celebrated our Marine Corps birthday, but then read the lineage of the 1st Marine Regiment, and then opened up on the enemy for 5 minutes to know that they're all out there and that they should remember who's in front of them. Those type of traditions can't be lost. Now, on the battlefield, our Marines need to educate themselves. This is a well-rounded fighting man, physically, mentally, and they need to be prepared to go and take that fight. But mentally, they need to study past conflicts, past fights, what was done inside those cities. How did they run checkpoints? How did they run control of the city? How did they do mount operations? And when I went to school of advanced warfighting, they took us all through the battlefields of Europe, and we met with some of the survivors. You got a lot of old people, you got young Marines. Reach out to these young Marines. Get these Marines to come forward and tell you their story. I want them to tell you how they did their operations. If you want to find out how a fire team operated or a squad, get a squad leader from that time frame. Tell them to come back and say, hey, you want to do a little battle study? You tell us how you cleared these buildings. Tell us how you brought in air. Or how did you take care of your casualties on the battlefield? In Iraq, I think Fallujah set the tone for the rest of the fighting, and eventually led to our forces coming back home, and us turning things over to the Iraqi forces, which was our goal and objective. So I think that this is one of those landmark battles that should not be forgotten, both because of the sacrifice of just tremendous young men. I look back at Byron Norwood, the Hell House. Marines were pinned down inside that building. Wortman's part of the reaction, or Norwood's part of the reaction force. One of the first guys to go in the building, went right through the front, and unfortunately he was killed. You want heroes? Those are heroes. I'll never forget him or his sacrifice, and or the sacrifice of all the Marines. I will be indebted to them for the rest of my life for the great things that they did over. The nation should be indebted to them for the rest of their lives, for everything that those Marine sailors, soldiers, and airmen did. Very proud of them and everything that they accomplished.
Oh man, so that is those are words to live by, and that's a good way to close, sir. I really appreciate you taking the time to really walk the dog with us on this battle. as we are at the 20-year anniversary of it. I just thank you so much, sir, for taking the time
It's a
to
pleasure,
share your
Vic.
experiences.
And I wish all our Marines out there, everybody out there that's listening, I wish them all the best. And look out for your fellow Marines. Go, if you see one of those vets, go and ask them about it. Make them tell you the story about Fallujah. It's how we remember. May we never forget their sacrifice, and may it inspire us to fight into the future.
Hoorah, sir. Really appreciate it. Thank
Take
you.
care, buddy.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.